Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient warships drift through the endless void like cathedrals of iron and hatred, there are stories that seasoned warriors tell only in whispers. These are not tales of glory or triumph, not the kinds of stories that inspire young recruits or fill the hearts of the faithful with hope. These are the stories that keep veterans awake in their bunks during the long transit hours, staring at the metal ceiling above them and wondering if this voyage will be their last. There is a name that drifts through the corridors of Imperial warships like poison gas. It is whispered in the trenches of fortress worlds by soldiers who know their time grows short. It echoes through the halls of the Inquisition, spoken only in sealed chambers where the full truth of the galaxy's horrors can be acknowledged. It is carved into the hearts of those who have witnessed his legions descend from the skies, who have seen the black tide of his warriors wash over everything they held dear. That name is Abaddon. In the grim darkness of the far future, where the Imperium of man stands battered and bleeding against threats from every corner of the galaxy, one figure has haunted humanity's nightmares for over 10,000 years. He is called the Despoiler, the Warmaster of Chaos, the Archfiend, and the heir to the most terrible legacy the galaxy has ever known. He is Ezekiel Abaddon, and his name has become synonymous with the destruction of worlds, the corruption of souls, and the slow, inexorable collapse of everything the Emperor of mankind tried to build. But here is what so many fail to understand. What the propagandists of the Imperium would rather you not contemplate in those quiet hours before sleep claims you. Abaddon is not merely a monster. He is not simply a creature of rage and destruction, mindlessly lashing out at the galaxy from his refuge within the Eye of Terror. He is something far more dangerous. He is a strategist of incomprehensible patience. He is a visionary whose plans span millennia. He is, quite possibly, the most successful military commander in the history of the galaxy. Consider this for a moment. Let it settle into your thoughts like sediment drifting to the bottom of still water. For 10,000 years, the forces of chaos have warred against the Imperium. In all that time, despite commanding armies of demons and corrupted space marines, despite wielding the power of 4 dark gods, and despite having access to sorceries that can unmake reality itself, what have the forces of chaos truly accomplished? The demon primarchs retreat to their pleasure worlds within the Eye of Terror. The warbands squabble amongst themselves for scraps of power. The great legions that once threatened to overthrow the Emperor have fractured into countless petty kingdoms, each too consumed by their own appetites to pose any real threat to humanity's dominion. And then there is Abaddon. While the demon primarchs content themselves with their eternal games, Abaddon has done what none of them could. He has torn the galaxy in half. The Great Rift, that bleeding wound in reality that stretches from one end of the galaxy to the other, exists because of his machinations. Cadia, the fortress world that held back the tide of chaos for 10 millennia, lies in ruins because he willed it so. The Imperium Nihilus, that vast swathe of humanity's territory cut off from the light of the Astronomicon, trembles beneath his shadow because he has declared himself its Warmaster. This is the story of how a mortal man achieved what demigods could not. This is the chronicle of the Long War, as waged by its most patient and most dangerous general. This is the tale of Abaddon the Despoiler, and how he became the most successful Warmaster the galaxy has ever seen. To understand the monster, we must first understand the man. Before the black armor and the demon sword, before the 13 Black Crusades and the fall of Cadia, before the name Despoiler was burned into the consciousness of every imperial citizen who had ever heard tales of chaos, there was simply Ezekiel, a child born to violence on a world where violence was the only currency that mattered. The planet Chthoniya was ancient before the Emperor ever walked among the stars. Located close to Terra, in the vast reaches of the segmentum solar. It had been colonized in the earliest days of human expansion, mined for its resources, until nothing remained but hollow warrens and endless tunnels burrowing into a depleted husk. By the time the Imperium rose to reclaim the scattered worlds of humanity, Chthoniya had devolved into something barely above savagery. Its people lived in the ruins of ancient mining complexes, organized into brutal gangs that waged endless wars for territory and survival. Imagine a world without sky, a place where the concept of horizon has no meaning because all you have ever seen are walls of rock and metal stretching in every direction. The air is stale, recycled through ancient machines whose origins have been forgotten, their maintenance reduced to religious ritual performed by tech shamans who understand nothing of the principles behind their prayers. Light comes from flickering lumen globes and the occasional forge fire, casting everything in shades of orange and shadow. This was Chthoniya, a world that had eaten itself and now sustained its population on scraps and violence. The gangs that ruled this dying world were not mere criminal organizations in the sense that citizens of more civilized planets might understand. They were governments, religions, and armies all rolled into one. A child born into a Chthonian gang inherited not just membership, but an entire worldview, a set of loyalties and hatreds that stretched back generations, blood feuds whose original causes had been forgotten but whose flames burned as hot as ever. To betray your gang was to betray your family, your ancestors, and everything that gave your existence meaning in a universe that offered precious little else. It was into this world that Ezekiel Abaddon was born, the firstborn son of Tarkaradon, one of the mightiest gang warlords on all of Chthoniya. From his earliest memories, Ezekiel knew only the law of strength. The weak perished in the gang wars, the strong survived. The strongest ruled. His father had clawed his way to power through decades of murder and manipulation, and he expected his son to follow the same blood-soaked path. Picture the young Ezekiel, growing in the dim corridors of Chthoniya's hive warrens. Massive even as a child, with the kind of natural ferocity that made older warriors think twice before crossing him. He learned to fight before he learned to read. He killed his first man before he reached what other worlds might call adolescence. In the gangs of Chthoniya, there was no room for childhood, no space for innocence. There was only the endless struggle for survival, and Ezekiel excelled at it in ways that even his ruthless father could not have anticipated. But something set Ezekiel apart from the other gang fighters, something that would define his entire existence for better or worse. He formed bonds. He made companions. In a world where trust was often rewarded with a knife in the back, a young Ezekiel gathered around himself a circle of oath companions, warriors who fought beside him and shared in his victories. Perhaps this was his first glimpse of what he would one day find among the lunar wolves. Perhaps it was simply the recognition that even the strongest warrior cannot stand alone against the world. His father watched this development with calculating eyes. Tarkaradon had not maintained his position for decades by being sentimental. He understood that Ezekiel's companions represented a potential threat to his own power. A son with loyal followers could become a son with ambitions of his own. And so, when Ezekiel came of age according to the brutal traditions of Chthoniya, his father demanded the unthinkable. The coming-of-age ritual required Ezekiel to execute his oath companions, every one of them. It was the final lesson that Tarkaradon wished to teach his son, the truth that had allowed the warlord to survive for so long in the cutthroat world of Chthonian politics. Trust no one, form no attachments, kill anyone who might one day become a threat. Ezekiel refused. In that moment of defiance, in that choice to value the bonds he had formed over the path his father had laid out for him, we see the first glimpse of the man Abaddon would become. Not a mindless killer, but a warrior who understood the value of loyalty. Not a slave to tradition, but a force that would reshape the very nature of authority to suit his own vision. When Tarkaradon demanded obedience, Ezekiel gave him death instead. He slew his father with his own hands, cut down the warlord's bodyguards, and walked out of his father's domain into exile. And the gangs that had once feared Abaddon hunted the patricidal son through the tunnels of Chthoniya. One by one, Ezekiel killed them all. He became a legend among his people, a ghost story that gang leaders used to frighten their own warriors. The son who had refused kingship, who had chosen brotherhood over power, and who had proven himself more dangerous alone than entire gangs of armed fighters. It was in the aftermath of one of these battles, when Ezekiel stood surrounded by the bodies of an entire gang that had made the mistake of cornering him, that he was found by representatives of the Lunar Wolves Legion. 2 space marines, Hastur Sejanus and Sirakul, had come to Chthoniya seeking recruits for their brotherhood. They found something more. They found a warrior whose potential transcended anything they had expected to discover on this dying world. Ezekiel was taken to Luna, the moon of terror, where the process of transforming a mortal man into a transhuman warrior began. The surgeries were agonizing. The genetic modifications pushed his body to the very edge of survival. But Ezekiel endured it all, just as he had endured everything that Chthoniya had thrown at him. When the procedures were complete, when the implants had settled and the conditioning had taken hold, he emerged as something more than human. He was a space marine of the Lunar Wolves, one of the Emperor's chosen instruments of conquest. And then he met Horus. The Primarch of the Lunar Wolves stood before the newly created space marine, and something passed between them. But perhaps Horus saw in Ezekiel a reflection of his own struggle for identity, his own complicated relationship with the father who had created him. Perhaps he simply recognized potential that begged to be cultivated. Whatever the reason, Horus gave the young warrior a simple gift, a coin, and accepted his pledge of service. From that moment on, Ezekiel Abaddon belonged to Horus as completely as he had once belonged to his oath companions on Chthoniya. The fierce loyalty that had caused him to defy his father now found a new focus, a cause worthy of his devotion. He would serve Horus with a fervor that bordered on worship, and in return, he would rise to heights that the son of a Chthonian gang lord could never have imagined. There was something almost spiritual in the bond that formed between Abaddon and Horus. Both the Primarch represented everything that Ezekiel had sought on Chthoniya, but never found. A leader worthy of following, a cause worth dying for, a brotherhood that transcended the petty concerns of territory and survival. In Horus, Abaddon saw a father who would never demand that he betray his companions, a lord who valued loyalty as much as Abaddon himself did. For his part, Horus recognized in Abaddon a kindred spirit. Here was a warrior forged in circumstances not unlike the Primarch's own early experiences on Chthoniya, where the Emperor had found him as a child and raised him to be a conqueror. Horus understood what it meant to be shaped by violence, to have one's character formed in the crucible of constant struggle. He saw in Abaddon not merely a useful tool, but a true son, and one who had earned his place through merit rather than mere genetic inheritance. This mutual recognition would form the foundation of a relationship that would shape the destiny of the galaxy. When Horus eventually fell to chaos, Abaddon fell with him, not because he was seduced by the ruinous powers, but because his loyalty to his Primarch exceeded all other considerations. And when Horus was finally destroyed, it was Abaddon who would carry forward the vision of the Long War, transforming what might have been a final defeat into the opening chapter of a conflict that would span 10,000 years. The years that followed were the golden age of Ezekiel's existence. The Great Crusade swept across the galaxy, and the Lunar Wolves were at the very forefront of its advance. They were the Emperor's tip of the spear, the first to make planetfall on hostile worlds, the first to break the backs of alien empires that had never imagined their dominion could be challenged. And at the heart of this conquering host, rising through the ranks with a speed that astonished even his superiors, was the warrior from Chthoniya. Abaddon proved himself to be more than simply a skilled fighter. On the battlefields of countless worlds, he demonstrated the kind of tactical instinct that could not be taught, only recognized and honed. He understood the flow of combat in ways that went beyond strategy and planning. He could read the movements of enemy forces like a scholar reading ancient texts, anticipate their decisions before they had even made them, and position his own warriors to exploit weaknesses that others would not see until it was too late. Watch him in battle during those golden years, and you would see something that approached art. The way he moved through enemy formations, not with the graceless brutality of a berserker, but with the precise economy of a master duelist. Every strike served a purpose. Every moment of violence advanced some larger tactical objective. He did not fight to kill, though killing was certainly part of it. He fought to win, and there is a profound difference between those two approaches that only those who have studied warfare at its highest levels can truly appreciate. His physical presence was immense, even by Space Marine standards. The genetic heritage of Chthonian had blessed him with a frame that towered over many of his brothers, broad shoulders and limbs thick with muscle, that even the enhancement processes of the Astartes could not diminish. When he entered a room, the attention of everyone present was drawn to him as naturally as iron filings drawn to a magnet. This was not merely a matter of physical size. There was something about the way he carried himself, a certainty in his movements and a weight to his gaze that suggested depths of will and determination that most mortals could scarcely comprehend. More importantly, he understood the souls of warriors. The men who fought beside him were not simply tools to be expended, but brothers whose loyalty had to be earned and maintained. He remembered the lesson of his oath companions, the truth that his father had tried to burn out of him. Bonds mattered. Trust mattered. A warrior who fought alongside brothers he trusted would accomplish more than an army of slaves driven forward by fear. And this philosophy served him well as he climbed the hierarchy of the Lunar Wolves. He became captain of the elite First Company, commander of the Legion's most fearsome warriors, the Terminators who served as Horus's personal guards. He led the Justarin, a force of black armored veterans whose reputation for ruthless efficiency became legendary even among legions known for their ruthlessness. But perhaps his greatest distinction came when he was inducted into the Mournival. The Mournival was unique among the legions. Other Primarchs surrounded themselves with yes-men, with warriors who would execute their orders without question. Horus chose differently. He gathered around himself 4 captains, each representing a different aspect of leadership, each encouraged to speak freely and challenge the Warmaster's assumptions when necessary. It was a council of equals, bound by honor rather than hierarchy, and it spoke to Horus's understanding that even a demigod could benefit from the counsel of those who saw the galaxy from different perspectives. The chamber where the Mournival met was called the Strategium aboard the Vengeful Spirit, though in truth, it was less a formal meeting room and more a space where brothers could speak as brothers. The 4 captains would gather there after battles, after planning sessions, sometimes in the quiet hours of the ship's artificial night cycle, when the weight of command grew heavy on their shoulders. They would speak of strategy and politics, of philosophy and faith, of their hopes for the future of the Great Crusade, and their fears about its direction. It was the kind of honest communion that most commanders never experience, isolated as they are by the demands of their rank. Abaddon took his place among the Mournival, alongside Tarek Torgadon, captain of the Second Company, and known for his irreverent humor. Horus, little Horus Aximand, captain of the Fifth Company, whose face bore such a resemblance to the Primarch that he was often mistaken for Horus himself. And Gaviel Loken, captain of the 10th Company, a warrior of unshakable integrity who represented the conscience of the Legion. Each brought something essential to the council. Torgadon could diffuse tension with a well-timed jest, could remind his brothers that even in the midst of galactic conquest, there was room for laughter and camaraderie. Aximand provided a voice of measured consideration, thoughtful and patient where others might rush to judgment. Could Loken ask the questions that others were afraid to ask, challenged assumptions that everyone else took for granted, and held the Mournival to standards that might otherwise have been compromised in the heat of campaign. In this company, Abaddon found something he had not known since his days on Chthonian. He found brotherhood. The Mournival brothers argued fiercely, laughed together, fought side by side, and challenged each other to be more than they had been. They were, in many ways, the oath companions that Abaddon's father had tried to force him to kill. Of the four, Abaddon was known as the most hawkish, the most aggressive in his council. Where Loken urged caution and Torgadon deflected tension with humor, Abaddon pushed for decisive action. He was the warrior's voice on the council, always ready to argue for the direct approach, was always confident that the Lunar Wolves could overcome any obstacle through superior firepower and martial skill. This reputation was cemented during the Ullanor Crusade, when the Imperium launched its greatest offensive against the Orc Empire that had threatened human expansion into the galaxy's core. The campaign was a proving ground for all the legions, but for the Lunar Wolves, it was something more. It was the campaign that would see Horus elevated above all his brothers, named Warmaster of the entire Great Crusade. During the final assault on the Orc warlord's stronghold, Horus led a teleport strike directly into the heart of the Greenskin command structure. He took with him the elite of his first company, including Abaddon, to face the Orc warlord Urlak Urg and his retinue of massive bodyguards. The fighting was ferocious beyond description. Orcs threw themselves at the Terminators in endless waves, crude weapons hammering against ceramite armor in a thunderous cacophony of violence. When Horus confronted Urlak Urg, the two titans clashed with a fury that shook the very foundations of the Orc fortress. Meanwhile, Abaddon and his brothers fought to hold off the 40 Orc nobs that served as the warlord's personal guard. The odds were impossible. Even Space Marines in Terminator armor should not have been able to stand against such numbers. When the battle ended, when Horus had cast the broken body of Urlak Urg from the battlements to break the will of his army, only one of the Terminators who had faced the nobs still lived. Abaddon stood alone among mountains of greenskin dead, his armor slicked with alien blood, as his weapons still raised in defiance of anything else that dared challenge him. He had held the line alone when every other warrior had fallen. He had proven himself worthy of standing at Horus's side. The Emperor himself witnessed this triumph. He came to Ullanor to celebrate the victory, and in doing so, made the announcement that would change the course of galactic history. Horus was named Warmaster, Supreme Commander of all Imperial military forces, the Emperor's chosen representative in the ongoing conquest of the stars. In that moment of triumph, none could have foreseen the darkness that awaited. The Lunar Wolves were renamed the Sons of Horus, and they carried their new colors proudly into the battles that followed. Abaddon stood at the right hand of the most powerful mortal being in the galaxy, confident in the righteousness of their cause, certain that nothing could stand against the combined might of the Imperium. But the seeds of corruption had already been planted. Even as the Great Crusade continued its march across the stars, forces older and more malevolent than anything the Imperium had yet faced were moving in the shadows. The Chaos Gods had taken notice of Horus Lupercal, and they had plans for humanity's greatest champion. The world of Davin would prove to be the turning point, the hinge upon which 10,000 years of history would swing. It was a world that the Lunar Wolves had brought into compliance years before, a primitive place whose people practiced strange rituals that the warriors of the Great Crusade had dismissed as superstition. What none of them realized was that those rituals were worship of something very real, very ancient, and very hungry. When Horus was mortally wounded during a confrontation with a corrupted planetary governor, the sons of Horus were thrown into chaos. Their Primarch, their father, the center of their universe, lay dying, and all the medical science of the Imperium could not save him. The apothecaries reported that the wound was not merely physical, but somehow metaphysical, as if something was eating away at Horus's very soul. It was Abaddon who made the decision that would damn them all. As a member of the warrior lodge that had spread through the Legion, a secret brotherhood inspired by the practices of Davin, Abaddon knew of the Serpent Lodge and its purported healers. Yet when Erebus of the Word-Bearers suggested that these native practitioners might succeed where imperial medicine had failed, Abaddon supported the plan. He was desperate. He would have done anything to save his Primarch, his father in all but blood. And so Horus was taken to the Serpent Lodge, where rituals were performed that reached beyond the veil of reality and touched the Imperium itself. What emerged from that temple was Horus in body, but something had changed in his soul. The Chaos Gods had spoken to him during his fever dream, had shown him visions of the future that filled him with rage and despair. They had convinced him that the Emperor planned to abandon his sons, that the Warmaster would be forgotten, while a bureaucracy of weaklings inherited the empire that the legions had bled to create. They had whispered of a different path, a way to claim the galaxy for those who had truly earned it. Abaddon did not immediately understand what had happened. He saw only that his Primarch had recovered, that Horus stood strong once more, and that the sons of Horus could continue their march of conquest. But in the weeks and months that followed, he began to sense the change. Horus grew more distant, more given to private counsel with warriors like Erebus, who had previously held little influence. The Mournival found itself increasingly marginalized, its advice sought less frequently, its objections brushed aside. And yet, when Horus finally revealed his intentions, when the Warmaster declared his rebellion against the Emperor, Abaddon did not hesitate. Whatever doubts he might have harbored, whatever questions he might have asked, but were swept away by the force of his loyalty. He had sworn himself to Horus on the day they first met, had pledged his service and his soul to the Primarch who had lifted him from the gangs of Chthoniya. If Horus said the Emperor was a tyrant who needed to be overthrown, then Abaddon would believe it. If the Warmaster commanded him to take up arms against everything he had once served, then Abaddon would do so without flinching. The purge at Istvan III was his first test, and he passed it with flying colours streaked in his brother's blood. The loyalist elements of the Sons of Horus, the Lunar Wolves veterans who had not embraced the warrior lodges or the new direction Horus was taking, were gathered on the planet's surface under the pretense of a standard compliance action. Then the fleet opened fire on their own, and drop pods filled with traitor marines rained down to finish what the bombardment had started. Abaddon led his Justarin into that hell without remorse. His targets were not faceless enemies, but warriors he had known, had fought beside, had called brothers. Among them were Tarik Torgadon and Garviel Loken, his Mournival brothers who had refused to turn against the Emperor. When Abaddon found Torgadon amid the carnage, there was no hesitation. He cut down his former friend with the same efficiency he would have shown any other enemy. Garviel Loken was left for dead, though he would survive to carry the memory of what Abaddon had become. In later years, the two would meet again, and Loken would see how far his former brother had fallen. But in that moment, amid the fires of Istvan III, as Abaddon had proven that his loyalty to Horus exceeded all other considerations, he had killed his brothers. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and he had done so willingly, even eagerly, because Horus had commanded it. The Horus heresy that followed was a cataclysm beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Fully half of the Space Marine legions turned against the Emperor, and the resulting civil war nearly destroyed the Imperium before it had truly begun. Worlds burned in the billions. Fleets clashed across the void in battles that decided the fates of entire sectors. Brother fought brother in a fratricidal madness that would leave scars on the galaxy for 10,000 years. Through it all, Abaddon served as Horus's right hand. At the dropsite massacre of Istvan V, he led the Justarin in the ambush that shattered 3 loyalist legions. At dozens of lesser engagements whose names have been lost to history, he commanded the Sons of Horus's vanguard, breaking enemy defenses and claiming worlds for the Warmaster's expanding domain. He became known as a general of terrible ability, a commander who could read the flow of battle and turn inevitable defeat into stunning victory. But as the heresy dragged on, as the years of war ground both sides down toward exhaustion, Abaddon began to have doubts, not about the cause itself, but about the way it was being prosecuted. He watched Horus rely more and more on the powers of chaos, saw the Warmaster make bargains with entities that even other traitors found disturbing. The sons of Horus, once the proudest legion in the Imperium, were becoming something else. Something corrupted. Something that Abaddon, for all his willingness to do terrible things, found himself unable to fully embrace. The Siege of Terror was supposed to be the end. The traitor legions had fought their way to the very heart of the Imperium, had breached the walls of the Emperor's palace, and were poised to finally overthrow the false Emperor and claim humanity for chaos. Victory was within reach. Everything the sons of Horus had sacrificed, every brother they had killed, every world they had burned, it was all about to be justified by the ultimate triumph. The orbital plates above Terra had burned for months before the first boots touched the sacred soil of humanity's birthworld. The sheer volume of debris and wreckage that filled the void around the planet created navigational hazards that would persist for millennia, and a permanent reminder of the fury that had been unleashed during those terrible days. From the surface, the night sky had ceased to exist, replaced by an endless ceiling of fire and falling stars that was actually the death throes of ships and stations being torn apart in the fighting above. The palace itself was a continent-spanning fortress, the largest and most heavily defended structure ever created by human hands. Its walls were hundreds of meters thick, constructed from materials that could withstand direct hits from orbital weapons. Its towers reached into the upper atmosphere, bristling with void shields and weapon batteries and sensor arrays that could detect the approach of enemy forces from light years away. It had been designed to withstand siege for decades, perhaps centuries, and the defenders intended to prove that its builders' confidence had been well placed. But the traitors came with such numbers and such fury that even these defenses began to falter. The walls were breached in a dozen places simultaneously. The gates, each a masterwork of defensive engineering, were forced open or simply torn down by the combined assault of demon engines and corrupted titans. The gardens and plazas that had once been places of contemplation and beauty became charnel houses where the blood of loyal defenders mingled with that of fallen traitors. But something was wrong with Horus. The Warmaster had become increasingly withdrawn as the siege progressed, spending long hours communing with forces that his warriors could not see, making decisions that seemed to defy tactical logic. Now, the power of chaos flowed through him so strongly that his mere presence caused reality to warp and twist. He was no longer the charismatic leader who had inspired the lunar wolves to conquer the stars. He was becoming something else, something that was more tool than master. Abaddon watched with growing horror as the chain of command within the sons of Horus began to break down. Warriors who should have been following orders were instead pursuing their own agendas, drunk on the power of chaos, more interested in claiming skulls for corn or experiencing forbidden pleasures than in achieving the strategic objectives that would actually win the war. The Legion was falling apart before his eyes, consumed by the very forces they had allied with. When Horus finally lowered the shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, thus inviting the Emperor to face him in single combat, Abaddon knew that something had gone terribly wrong. He gathered what loyal officers he could find, warriors who still retained some semblance of sanity and discipline, and fought his way through the chaos of the palace toward the Vengeful Spirit. He had to reach Horus. He had to understand what was happening. He had to find some way to salvage the victory that was slipping through their fingers. He did not arrive in time. When Abaddon finally reached the throne room of the Vengeful Spirit, he found a scene of devastation. Sanguinius, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, lay broken upon the deck, his magnificent wings torn and bloodied. And before the golden throne that Horus had mockingly constructed, the Warmaster himself lay dying, struck down by the Emperor in their final confrontation. As the psychic backlash of the battle had annihilated Horus's soul so completely that nothing remained, not even the corrupt essence that the Chaos Gods had poured into him. Abaddon stood over the body of the being he had worshipped as a father, and something inside him broke. Not his resolve, not his hatred for the Imperium, but his faith in the Chaos Gods, who had promised Horus victory and delivered only death.
You know, I have to be honest with you all. When I first got into the hobby years ago, I thought Abaddon was kind of a joke. The community memes about fail Abaddon and his arms falling off were everywhere, and it was easy to dismiss him as this guy who just kept losing crusades over and over again. But the more I actually read into the lore, the more I realized how wrong that perception was. Games Workshop really did him dirty for a long time by not explaining what he was actually accomplishing. Once you understand the Crimson Path and how each crusade was a deliberate step forward breaking Cadia, it completely reframes everything. He went from being a meme to genuinely one of my favorite characters in the setting. Patient, calculating, refusing to kneel to anyone, not even the gods he works with. That's what makes him terrifying. Anyway, let's get back into it.
In that moment, looking upon the empty shell of his Primarch, Abaddon came to a realization that would define the next 10,000 years of his existence. Horus had been weak. Horus had been a fool. He had the entire galaxy within his grasp, and he had let it slip away because he had given himself too completely to the powers of chaos. He had become a slave when he should have remained a master, when he had let the ruinous powers use him as a weapon rather than using them as tools. Abaddon would not make the same mistake. In the chaos of the retreat that followed, Abaddon took command of the sons of Horus. The Legion fled terror with the body of their fallen Primarch, pursued by loyalist forces that now moved with renewed vigor. The Great Traitor Alliance was collapsing as warbands turned on each other or fled into the warp to escape the vengeance of the Imperium. The scouring had begun, and the forces of chaos were being driven from real space into the hellish refuge of the Eye of Terror. But Abaddon was not content to simply survive. Even in those dark days of flight and desperation, he was planning. The defeat at Terra was not the end. It was a setback. The long war would continue, and this time, as it would be waged by someone who understood the true nature of the enemy, both the false emperor and the chaos gods who had proven themselves unreliable allies. The years that followed Horus's death were some of the darkest in the history of the traitor legions. Driven into the Eye of Terror, the survivors of the heresy found themselves trapped in a realm where the laws of physics gave way to the whims of thirsting gods. Time flowed differently within the Eye. Decades might pass in real space, while only days elapsed within its boundaries, or vice versa. The constant presence of chaos energy warped flesh and mind alike, transforming warriors into monsters and driving sane men to madness. The sons of Horus fared worse than most. Other legions had patron gods to call upon, dark powers who would protect and strengthen their chosen servants. As the word-bearers had the favor of all four gods through their devotion to Chaos Undivided. The Death Guard were claimed by Nurgle, the World Eaters by Khorne, the Emperor's Children by Slanesh, and the Thousand Sons by Tzeentch. But the sons of Horus had been Horus's legion, bound to their Primarch rather than any cosmic power, and with Horus dead, they found themselves adrift. Other legions looked upon the sons of Horus with contempt and hatred. These were the warriors who had failed at the moment of triumph. Their Primarch's hesitation and eventual defeat had cost Chaos its best chance at victory. Warbands from the other legions attacked the sons of Horus openly, stealing their weapons, their supplies, and their warriors. The once proud legion was reduced to scattered remnants, fleeing from enemies on all sides. Thus, this period became known as the Legion Wars, or the Slave Wars, a time of brutal conflict within the Eye of Terror, as the traitor legions turned on each other in the absence of the unifying force that Horus had represented. The sons of Horus suffered terribly during this time. Their numbers dwindled, their pride was shattered. Many began to despair that the legion would survive at all. Abaddon himself withdrew during much of this period, wandering the Eye of Terror alone or with only a handful of companions. He was searching for something, though the records of exactly what remained fragmentary and contradictory. Some say he was exploring the nature of chaos itself, studying the ruinous powers from a perspective that no mortal had ever attempted. Others claim he was hunting for specific artifacts or weapons that would give him the power he needed to restore the Legion. Whatever the truth, when Abaddon finally emerged from his wandering, he had been transformed. The catalyst came when Fabius Bile, the twisted apothecary of the Emperor's children, succeeded in creating clones of Horus from the genetic material preserved from the Warmaster's body. The news spread through the Eye of Terror like wildfire. Horus could return. The Warmaster might live again to lead his sons to victory. Some of the remaining sons of Horus greeted this news with joy. They saw it as salvation, a chance to restore the glory days of the Legion under their resurrected Primarch. They began to worship the clones as divine beings, a proof that Horus had transcended death and would one day return to claim his rightful throne. Abaddon saw something very different. He saw weakness. He saw a legion so broken that they would rather cling to the memory of a dead god than forge their own destiny. He saw warriors who had learned nothing from the defeat at Terra, who would once again subordinate themselves to a master rather than becoming masters themselves. He would not allow it. Abaddon gathered his most loyal followers and launched a devastating assault on the Emperor's children forces that held Horus's clones. The attack was swift and merciless, the work of warriors who had fully embraced the cold fury that would define the Black Legion for millennia to come. When it was over, every clone of Horus had been destroyed, but the body of the original Warmaster was utterly annihilated, leaving nothing that could ever be used to resurrect him. The cult that had formed around Horus's memory was shattered, its adherents dead or scattered. Standing amid the wreckage, Abaddon addressed the survivors of the Sons of Horus. His words have been preserved in the dark chronicles of the Black Legion, and they represent a fundamental break with everything the Legion had been. Horus was weak, Abaddon declared. Horus was a fool. He had the whole galaxy within his grasp, and he let it slip away. The message was clear. There would be no resurrection. There would be no return to the past. The Sons of Horus were dead as their Primarch. Something new would rise in their place. Under Abaddon's command, yet the Legion repainted their armor from the sea green of the Sons of Horus to pure black, the color of mourning and vengeance. They cast off the name that had brought them nothing but failure and shame. From that day forward, they would be known as the Black Legion, a force bound not to any Primarch or any god, but to the vision of one man and the burning desire to succeed where all others had failed. The transformation was not merely symbolic. Abaddon restructured the Legion along new lines, breaking with the traditions that had defined Space Marine organization for centuries. Where other traitor legions fragmented into countless warbands, each pursuing their own agendas, the Black Legion maintained a unified command structure with Abaddon at its head. Warriors from other legions were welcomed into their ranks, not as subordinates to be absorbed, but as brothers who shared the same goal of bringing down the Imperium. Most importantly, Abaddon established a new relationship with the Chaos Gods. He would accept their gifts and use their power, but he would never surrender himself to them as Horus had done. The ruinous powers recognized something in him, some combination of will and destiny that made him valuable as an instrument of destruction. They granted him the mark of Chaos Ascendant, the favor of all four gods simultaneously, a blessing so rare that few mortals had ever received it. But the gods understood that they did not own Abaddon, and Abaddon understood that he did not serve them. It was an alliance of convenience, a relationship between equals who happened to share common enemies. The Chaos Gods wanted the Imperium destroyed. Thus Abaddon wanted to destroy the Imperium. For now, their goals aligned. But Abaddon never forgot that the gods had failed Horus when he needed them most, and he would never trust them with his soul. During his wanderings within the Eye of Terror, Abaddon had heard whispers of a weapon of incredible power, a demon sword forged from the first murder committed by human hands, a blade so ancient and so terrible that even other demons spoke of it with fear. It was called Drachnien, a name that translated roughly as the end of empires, and it was said to be bound within a labyrinth beneath a structure known as the Tower of Silence on a world called Uralan. The origins of Drachnien stretch back to the very dawn of human consciousness, to an age so remote that even the oldest records of the Eldar contain no memory of it. As according to the legends that have survived, Drachenyan was born at the moment of the first murder, the instant when one human first took the life of another, not out of necessity for survival, but out of anger, or jealousy, or hate. That act of violence, that willing destruction of another thinking being, created a ripple in the warp that coalesced into something new, something hungry, something that would never stop feeding. The name, Drachenyan, is itself a translation of the scream that accompanied that first murder, the sound that the dying human made, and that his killer uttered simultaneously. It is a sound that exists in the warp as a constant echo, a psychic frequency that resonates with every act of violence committed since that primordial moment. Those who hear it clearly, who attune themselves to its terrible vibration, can draw upon it for power, but they risk their sanity and their souls in doing so, for Drachenyan does not give its gifts freely. Throughout human history, the demon that would become known as Drachenyan has taken many forms and influenced many events. During the Age of Strife, when humanity was scattered and vulnerable, Drachenyan walked among the stars as a being of living shadow, sowing discord and feeding on the slaughter that followed. When the Emperor of Mankind launched his unification wars on Terra, Drachenyan was there, opposing him at every turn, seeing in the Emperor a threat to the chaos upon which it thrived. The acquisition of Drachenyan became the primary objective of Abaddon's First Black Crusade. The crusade began in 781 M31, barely 2 centuries after the Horus Heresy, and it sent shockwaves through an Imperium that had believed itself safe from the threat of chaos. The Black Legion emerged from the Eye of Terror in force, accompanied by allied warbands and demon hosts, and fell upon the world surrounding the Cadian Gate with terrible fury. Imperial forces scrambled to respond, but the attack was unlike anything they had faced since the Siege of Terra. But Abaddon's true objective was not conquest. While the Black Legion ravaged world after world, drawing the attention of Imperial defenders, Abaddon himself led an elite force to Uralan. There, he entered the Tower of Silence and descended into the labyrinth beneath. What Abaddon found within that maze of impossible angles was beyond anything even his millennia of experience had prepared him for. Whilst the guardians of the tower were creatures of dark energy, constructs that existed outside normal space and time, the labyrinth itself was a trap designed to ensnare and destroy anyone who entered. Passages shifted and reformed behind him. Time flowed at different rates in different sections. The very walls seemed alive with malevolent intelligence, seeking to confuse and consume anyone foolish enough to challenge their depths. But Abaddon pressed on, driven by a will that refused to yield. He had not come this far, had not sacrificed everything he once was, to be stopped by obstacles no matter how formidable. Where others would have retreated or gone mad, he advanced, cutting through guardians with his weapons and navigating the shifting passages through a combination of instinct and sheer determination. At the center of the labyrinth, yet he found a towering figure wreathed in golden light. This entity led him deeper, to the heart of the maze, where a shard of shifting darkness hung suspended in the air. When Abaddon reached out and grasped it, Drachenyan took the form of a fearsome blade. The demon within the sword was not subservient. Drachenyan was an entity of such power that it could have destroyed Abaddon's soul in an instant. But something passed between them, some recognition of kindred purpose. The sword chose Abaddon as its wielder, and from that day forward, no other hand could hold Drachenyan. Anyone who attempted to take the blade would find themselves torn apart by warp energy, their souls devoured by the hungry demon within. The form that Drachenyan takes in Abaddon's hands is something approaching a two-handed sword, though its dimensions seem to shift and change depending on the observer. The guard is golden, formed into the shape of a leering demonic face. The blade itself is blue, shot through with veins of red that pulse like living blood vessels. And across its surface, faces writhe in eternal torment, the souls of those Drachenyan has consumed over the millennia, forever aware, forever suffering, forever screaming in silent agony. Armed with Drachnyen, Abaddon had become one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. The demon sword could cut through any material substance, could sever the bonds that held reality together, could devour the souls of those it slew. Combined with the talon of Horus, the lightning claw that had been his Primarch's signature weapon and which Abaddon had claimed after destroying Horus's body, or the Warmaster of Chaos wielded a combination of weapons that no enemy could stand against. The talon of Horus deserves special mention, for it represents both Abaddon's inheritance and his statement of intent. This massive lightning claw, fitted with an integrated storm bolter that can fire without impeding the weapon's melee capabilities, was crafted by the Dark Mechanicum specifically for Horus Lupercal during the lead-up to the heresy. It was the weapon that struck down Sanguinius, the Blood Angel's Primarch, during the final battle aboard the Vengeful Spirit. It was the weapon that Horus raised against the Emperor himself in their final confrontation. When Abaddon claimed the Talon after destroying Horus's body, he was doing more than simply acquiring a powerful weapon. He was declaring that the legacy of the Warmaster now belonged to him, not to the Chaos gods who had promised Horus victory and delivered only death, not to the clones that Fabius Bile had created in some mad attempt to resurrect what had been lost. To him, to Ezekiel Abaddon, who had learned from his father's failure and would not repeat his mistakes. Together, Drachnyen and the Talon of Horus make Abaddon nearly unstoppable in personal combat. The demon sword can cut through any defense, while the lightning claw allows him to strike with blinding speed at multiple opponents simultaneously. His Terminator armor, a masterwork of chaos-corrupted technology that has been modified and enhanced over 10,000 years of warfare, provides protection against all but the most devastating attacks. And the Mark of Chaos Ascendant, which grants him the favor of all 4 Chaos gods without making him beholden to any of them, ensures that he can draw upon the power of the warp when needed without sacrificing his independence. The First Black Crusade ended with the Imperial forces claiming victory, having driven the Chaos forces back into the Eye of Terror. But Abaddon had achieved his true objective. He had claimed Drachnyen. He had proven that the Black Legion could strike from the Eye and threaten the very heart of the Imperium. And he had learned valuable lessons about Imperial defenses that would inform his future campaigns. This pattern would repeat itself across the next 12 Black Crusades. Each time, the Imperium would celebrate their supposed victory as the forces of chaos retreated. Each time, Abaddon had already accomplished his true objectives before the first bolt was fired. The Imperium saw a series of failed invasions. Abaddon saw a chess game spanning millennia, each move bringing him closer to checkmate. Consider what this means from a strategic perspective. Every Imperial general who faced Abaddon believed they were fighting a battle for conquest, a straightforward military engagement where success could be measured in territory held and enemy forces destroyed. They committed resources based on this understanding, deployed their forces according to doctrines designed to counter conventional invasions, celebrated victories that they believed represented meaningful setbacks for the archenemy. Meanwhile, Abaddon was playing an entirely different game, and his true objectives were often achieved in the opening hours of each crusade, before the Imperial response had even begun to materialize. The fighting that followed, the battles that filled history books and earned medals for Imperial commanders, was essentially a diversion, a way to keep the defenders busy while his real work was completed and his forces extracted. This is what makes Abaddon so different from other Chaos champions, and indeed from most military commanders in human history. He does not measure success by the standards that others would apply. A crusade that ends in retreat is not a failure if it has achieved its actual purpose. A battle that costs thousands of Black Legionnaires is not a defeat if it has advanced the larger strategic plan. He thinks on timescales that would drive mortal generals to madness. And he never loses sight of the ultimate objective even when pursuing what appear to be tangential goals. The Second Black Crusade targeted the worlds of Bellis Corona, Port Maur, and Belisarius. While appearing to be a straightforward attempt at conquest, Abaddon was actually testing Imperial response times and identifying weaknesses in their defensive networks. He noted how long it took for reinforcements to arrive, which commanders showed tactical flexibility and which merely followed doctrine, where the supply lines were most vulnerable and where the communications could be disrupted most effectively. All of this information would prove invaluable in later campaigns. The Third Black Crusade brought him into direct conflict with Cadia for the first time, though his true goal was assessing the strength of the fortress world's defenses rather than capturing it outright. He threw his forces against the Cadian walls, not to breach them, but to measure them, to understand how the defenders would react under pressure, to identify the commanders who would prove most troublesome in the final reckoning. The casualties his forces suffered were acceptable losses in exchange for the strategic intelligence gained. The Fourth Black Crusade saw Abaddon launch a seemingly inexplicable attack on the citadel of Cromarch on El Fano. Imperial strategists were baffled by the target selection, wondering why the Warmaster would waste resources on such a remote location. What they did not realize was that El Fano was home to a pylon similar to those on Cadia, as one of the ancient structures that helped maintain the barrier between real space and the warp. Abaddon personally led the assault that destroyed the citadel, smashing through its gates with the power of Drachnien. With the pylon destroyed, another thread in the fabric that held back the warp was severed. The Fifth Black Crusade unleashed Doombreed, the greatest of Khorne's demon princes, upon the Imperium. Doombreed was a being of almost inconceivable age and power, said to have been elevated to demonhood in the earliest days of human history, when the first great civilizations of old Earth waged wars of such brutality that they caught the attention of the blood god himself. To secure his alliance was a diplomatic triumph that shocked even the other powers of chaos, who had long believed Doombreed too proud and too independent to serve any mortal master. The resulting devastation forced the Imperium to commit massive resources to containing the threat, resources that could not be used to defend other sectors. But the true purpose of the crusade was to convince Doombreed to swear alliance to Abaddon, adding the demon's terrible power to the Warmaster's growing coalition. After the crusade concluded, Doombreed would answer Abaddon's call in future conflicts, bringing with him demon legions that had served the blood god since before humanity learned to write. The Sixth Black Crusade targeted the Sons of the Eye, another warband descended from the original Sons of Horus, who had refused to join the Black Legion. These warriors still wore the sea-green colors of their original legion. He still spoke of Horus with reverence, still believed that they represented the true inheritors of the Warmaster's legacy. Abaddon saw them as a threat to his claim as Horus's true successor, and systematically eliminated them, absorbing those warriors who would submit and slaughtering those who would not. This was more than mere political consolidation. The Sons of the Eye represented an alternative vision of what the descendants of the Sons of Horus could be, a challenge to Abaddon's assertion that the old ways had to be abandoned in favor of something new. By destroying them, he was not merely removing rivals, but making a statement about the nature of the Long War itself. There would be no going back. There would be no return to the glory days of the Great Crusade. There would only be the Black Legion and its singular focus on bringing down the Imperium. Each crusade had its own objectives, its own secrets, its own contribution to a master plan that the Imperium would not fully understand until it was far too late. Abaddon was destroying the pylon network, the ancient Necron-built structures that held back the tide of the warp. He was gathering allies and eliminating rivals. He was testing defenses and identifying weaknesses. He was building towards something, though only he fully understood what that something was. The Seventh Black Crusade saw the destruction of the Blood Angels' chapter world of Makan, though the Blood Angels themselves survived to seek vengeance. This crusade demonstrated Abaddon's understanding of the psychological dimensions of warfare. The Blood Angels were one of the most revered chapters in the Imperium, their Primarch Sanguinius having died defending the Emperor during the final confrontation with Horus. By striking at their home world, Abaddon was sending a message that no part of the Imperium was safe. that even the most honored of the Emperor's servants could be reached and harmed. The psychological impact extended far beyond the Blood Angels themselves. News of the attack spread through the Imperium, carried by merchants and pilgrims and the crews of naval vessels. On 1,000 worlds, citizens who had never seen a space marine and never would felt a chill of fear, knowing that the archenemy could strike at will against even the greatest defenders of humanity. This erosion of confidence was itself a weapon, one that Abaddon wielded as skillfully as Draknyen. The Eighth Black Crusade, known as the Skullgather, was a ritualistic campaign of murder across dozens of worlds that drove hundreds of inquisitorial adepts insane, trying to understand its purpose. The killings followed precise patterns, specific numbers of victims in specific locations arranged in specific configurations. Inquisitors devoted their entire careers to breaking the cipher, convinced that understanding the pattern would reveal Abaddon's greater strategy. They never succeeded, and the effort cost them dearly in sanity and resources. What they did not realize was that the Skullgather served a dual purpose. On one level, it was a massive offering to Tzeentch, the chaos god of change and manipulation, whose favor could be earned through acts of elaborate deception and complexity. On another level, it was destroying more pylons, of further weakening the barrier between dimensions. The patterns that so obsessed the Inquisition were not merely symbolic but functional, warp rituals on a planetary scale that severed the metaphysical anchors holding reality in place. The Ninth Black Crusade targeted Cancephalus, an imperial naval fortress of strategic importance. The station served as a base for patrol fleets that monitored the approaches to the Cadian Gate, a tripwire that would provide early warning of any major chaos incursion. Abaddon understood that removing this obstacle would be essential to the success of later campaigns, and he committed significant resources to its complete destruction. The assault on Cancephalus lasted for months, a grinding campaign of attrition that tested the limits of both attackers and defenders. When it finally fell, Abaddon ordered it bombarded with cyclonic torpedoes, weapons capable of stripping away a world's atmosphere and rendering its surface uninhabitable. He wanted no possibility of the fortress being rebuilt, no chance that the Imperium would restore this early warning post. The ruins of Cancephalus still drift through that region of space, a monument to the thoroughness of Abaddon's vengeance. The 10th struck at Medusa, homeworld of the Iron Hands, in concert with Perturabo and the Iron Warriors. Though the Iron Hands survived, Abaddon learned crucial information about their defenses and the capabilities of their forces. This crusade also served to cement his alliance with Perturabo, the demon primarch of the Iron Warriors, whose expertise in siege warfare and demon engine construction would prove invaluable in later campaigns. The working relationship between Abaddon and the demon primarchs is one of the most fascinating aspects of his leadership. Unlike the god-bound primarchs, Abaddon retains his mortality and his independence. In theory, this should make him subordinate to beings who possess the power of gods. In practice, his refusal to submit to any single chaos power has actually given him leverage over all of them. The demon primarchs need a mortal champion who can operate freely in real space, who can unite the fractious warbands of chaos, who can provide the strategic direction that their god-touched minds often struggle to maintain. Abaddon provides all of this, and in return, he receives their support when he needs it. The 11th Black Crusade was fought primarily in the Warp, a shadow war against forces that most Imperial scholars refuse to acknowledge even existed. The details of this campaign remain almost entirely classified, known only to the highest ranks of the Inquisition, and kept secret even from most of the Imperial military. What can be said is that Abaddon emerged from it with new alliances and new capabilities, having proven himself in conflicts that transcended the material universe entirely. The 12th, known as the Gothic War, saw Abaddon capture 2 of the remaining Blackstone fortresses, ancient weapons of devastating power that had been created by the Eldar to fight the C'tan, but could now be turned against the Imperium. The Gothic War deserves special attention because it demonstrates Abaddon's ability to adapt his tactics and pursue multiple objectives simultaneously. And the conflict lasted for years, involving engagements across the entire Gothic sector and drawing in naval forces from across the Segmentum Obscurus. At its height, the war involved thousands of ships and millions of personnel on both sides, making it one of the largest naval conflicts since the Horus Heresy. But while the Imperium focused on defending its territory and pushing back the Chaos advance, Abaddon's true objective was always the Blackstone fortresses. These ancient constructs, remnants of the war in heaven, fought between the Old Ones and the Satan millions of years before humanity existed, possessed powers that defied comprehension. They could fire beams of warp energy capable of destroying stars. They could manipulate the fabric of space itself. In the right hands, as a single Blackstone fortress was a weapon capable of threatening entire sectors. Abaddon secured 2 of these fortresses during the Gothic War, adding them to his already formidable arsenal. The Imperium managed to destroy a 3rd to prevent it from falling into Chaos hands, a Pyrrhic victory that cost them dearly in ships and personnel. The remaining fortresses remain scattered across the galaxy, their locations closely guarded secrets that both sides continue to seek. Through it all, Abaddon maintained his focus on the ultimate goal. The Black Crusades were not failures. They were steps on a path that only he could see, a crimson path that would lead from the Eye of Terror all the way to Holy Terror itself. And then came the 13th. The 13th, Black Crusade, which began around 999 M41, was unlike anything that had come before. This was not a raid, not a limited incursion with secret objectives hidden behind a facade of conquest. This was the real thing, the culmination of 10,000 years of planning and preparation. Abaddon was making his move. The portents that preceded the crusade were unmistakable to those with eyes to see them. Astropaths across the Imperium reported visions of fire and darkness, of a wound opening in the sky that would swallow worlds. The Emperor's Tarot consistently produced readings of doom and catastrophe. On Cadia itself, the ancient pylons that had stood silent for millennia suddenly began to vibrate with psychic energy, as if sensing the approach of something terrible. The scale of the invasion was almost beyond comprehension. Every warband that Abaddon could call upon, every demon that owed him allegiance, and every corrupted Forge World and Chaos-touched battle fleet, all of them converged on the Cadian Gate for the final assault. The Daemon Primarchs themselves emerged from their pleasure worlds to join the crusade, adding the power of demigods to Abaddon's already fearsome host. The Vengeful Spirit led the advance, Abaddon's flagship cutting through the void like a blade through flesh. Behind it came the Black Fleet, thousands of vessels ranging from massive battle barges to nimble raiders, all painted in the black and gold of the Black Legion. And among them sailed the Arks of Omen, the modified space hulks that Vashtor had transformed into weapons of unprecedented destructive power. The demon legions that accompanied the fleet defied counting. Greater demons of all 4 chaos gods marched alongside their lesser kin, us bound to the material universe by the sheer weight of warp energy that accompanied the crusade. Reality itself began to fray at the edges, the veil between dimensions growing thin enough that mortals could glimpse the horrors that lurked on the other side. The Imperium mobilized in response, drawing forces from across the galaxy to defend Cadia. The fortress world had stood against chaos for 10,000 years. It was the linchpin of the Cadian Gate defenses, the only stable route out of the Eye of Terror. Its pylons, those ancient Necron structures that weakened the influence of the warp, had kept the Eye from expanding further into real space. If Cadia fell, the consequences would be catastrophic. Lord Castellan Sarkar E. Creed took personal command of the defense, marshalling the legendary Cadian shock troops for what he knew might be their final battle. These were soldiers who had been trained for war from childhood, who could field strip a laser gun before they learned to read, who measured their worth in battles fought and enemies slain. Generation after generation of Cadians had stood watch on the walls of their fortress world, and now they would be tested as never before. Space Marines from dozens of chapters answered the call to Cadia's defense. The Black Templars came with their characteristic fervor, crusading knights who saw the defense of Cadia as a holy duty. The Dark Angels sent forces despite the secrets they kept, even from their allies. The Space Wolves brought their savage fury, Vikings of the stars who relished the chance to face the archenemy in open battle. Saint Celestine appeared on the battlefield as well, the living saint whose miraculous resurrections had made her a symbol of the Emperor's blessing. Her presence rallied the defenders in their darkest hours, her golden light driving back the shadow of chaos and inspiring feats of courage that would be remembered for millennia. The fighting that followed was some of the most intense in galactic history. Billions died on both sides as the forces of chaos threw themselves against the Cadian defenses again and again. Saint Celestine, the living saint, rallied the defenders with her miraculous presence. Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed directed the Cadian forces with brilliant tactical acumen. Space Marines from dozens of chapters fought alongside the Imperial Guard, presenting a united front against the archenemy. For a time, it seemed as though the Imperium might prevail. The pylons on Cadia were activated at full power, cutting the Chaos forces off from much of their demonic support. Abaddon himself was wounded in combat with Celestine, forced to teleport away before the battle could turn decisively against him. The Imperial forces began planning celebrations, confident that the worst of the crisis had passed. They were wrong. Abaddon had not come this far to be defeated by a temporary setback. When it became clear that a conventional victory was slipping from his grasp, he implemented a contingency plan that demonstrated the ruthless nature of his strategic thinking. He ordered the remains of the Blackstone Fortress Will of Eternity to be hurled from orbit onto Cadia's surface. The impact was apocalyptic. The massive fragments of the ancient fortress struck Cadia with the force of an extinction-level asteroid. The shockwaves tore across the planet's surface, shattering the defensive fortifications that had held back the Chaos assault. More importantly, the impact destroyed the pylon network that had protected Cadia for millennia. Imagine watching from orbit as a world dies. The impact point glows white-hot, a second sun blazing on the planet's surface as the energy of the collision converts matter to plasma. Shockwaves radiate outward from the strike zone, visible even from space as they tear through the atmosphere and shatter everything in their path. Mountains crumble. Cities vanish in instants. The very crust of the world begins to crack and shift as the planet struggles to absorb the impossible violence being done to it. And then the warp began to bleed through. Without the pylons to hold it back, the Eye of Terror began to expand. Raw warp energy flooded into real space, transforming Cadia from a fortress world into a demon world in a matter of hours. The survivors were forced to evacuate, watching helplessly as their homeworld was consumed by the very forces they had spent their lives fighting against. The screams of millions of souls being torn from their bodies and devoured by hungry demons echoed across the psychic frequencies, a choir of agony that drove more than a few astropaths to madness. Lord Castellan Creed stayed behind to cover the evacuation, his final fate uncertain. Some say he was killed in the fighting, a hero's death on the world he had sworn to defend. Others whisper that he was taken alive by the Necron Trazyn the Infinite, and added to the Xenos Lord's collection of historical artifacts. Whatever the truth, his sacrifice bought precious time for millions of Cadian refugees to escape the dying world. But the destruction of Cadia was only the beginning. With the pylon network shattered, with the barrier between real space and the warp compromised, something began to happen on a galactic scale. The Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, tore across the stars like a wound in reality itself. This massive warp storm stretched from one end of the galaxy to the other, effectively splitting the Imperium in two. The Great Rift was not merely a storm in the conventional sense. It was a permanent scar in the fabric of reality, a channel through which the energies of the warp could pour into the material universe. Along its length, few worlds that had stood for millennia were consumed by demonic incursions. Ships that attempted to cross it were torn apart or lost in the tides of the Imperium. The Astronomicon itself, the psychic beacon that had guided Imperial navigation for 10,000 years, was dim to those on the far side of the rift, rendering interstellar travel nearly impossible. Everything north of the rift became the Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, cut off from the light of the Astronomicon and the authority of Terra. Billions of Imperial citizens suddenly found themselves isolated from the rest of humanity, easy prey for the chaos forces that poured through the countless new warp rifts spawned by the Great Rift's opening. Communication became nearly impossible. Travel became extraordinarily dangerous. The Imperium, and already strained to the breaking point, suddenly faced an existential crisis that made all previous threats pale in comparison. Worlds that had never known the touch of chaos suddenly found themselves beset by demonic invasions. Planetary governors who had spent their entire careers administering peaceful systems were suddenly forced to become military commanders, organizing desperate defenses against enemies they had only read about in ancient texts. Many failed. Many more simply vanished, their fates unknown, their populations presumed consumed by the horrors that now roamed freely across the galaxy. And in the heart of this chaos, Abaddon declared himself Warmaster of the Imperium Nihilus. The title was not merely a boast. With the Great Rift preventing effective imperial response, and Abaddon controlled more territory than Horus had ever held during the heresy. He had not simply broken the Imperium's defenses, he had fundamentally altered the strategic reality of the galaxy. The Long War, which had seemed like an endless stalemate for 10,000 years, had suddenly shifted decisively in favor of chaos. Even his former failures were revealed as successes. Every pylon he had destroyed in previous crusades had weakened the barrier that held the warp at bay. Every world he had corrupted had become a staging ground for the final assault. Every enemy he had eliminated had removed a potential obstacle from his path. The Imperial strategists who had mocked Abaddon's supposed failures now realized that they had been outmaneuvered on a timescale that their mortal minds could barely comprehend. But the years following the Great Rift's opening have seen Abaddon consolidate his gains and extend his influence even further. The Arcs of Omen campaign, launched in alliance with the demon Vashtor the Archiphane, represents his latest offensive against the weakened Imperium. Modified space hulks, transformed by Vashtor's techno-sorcery into massive war platforms, have been sent across the galaxy to secure artifacts of mysterious purpose. Vashtor himself is a fascinating figure, one who deserves attention for what his alliance with Abaddon reveals about the Warmaster's strategic thinking. Unlike the four major chaos gods, Vashtor is not a being of emotion and excess, but of industry and creation. He rules over the soul forges, the regions of the warp where demon engines are birthed, where technology and demonic essence are fused into weapons of nightmare potency. His domain is the screaming furnace and the tortured assembly line, the place where mortal ingenuity is corrupted and turned against its creators. Vashtor aspires to become the fifth major chaos god, to join the ranks of Horn, Tzench, Nurgle, and Slaanesh as a power that commands worship across the galaxy. To achieve this, he believes he needs to acquire something called the Key, a weapon or artifact of such power that possessing it would elevate him beyond his current status. This ambition has driven him to seek alliance with Abaddon, who possesses the military might necessary to recover the Key's scattered components. For Abaddon, the alliance offers significant advantages, as Vashtor's mastery of demon engines provides the Black Legion with weapons of unprecedented destructive power. The Arcs of Omen themselves are testament to what this partnership can achieve. Space hulks that have been transformed from chaotic masses of wreckage into disciplined war platforms capable of challenging Imperial battle fleets. The Obeliscan, a sort of dark Astronomicon created by Vashtor, allows chaos forces to coordinate their movements, and navigate the warp with greater precision than ever before. The alliance with Vashtor itself demonstrates Abaddon's continued strategic brilliance. Vashtor is a demon entity who aspires to become the fifth major chaos god, the lord of industry and mechanical horror. His powers of creation and corruption complement Abaddon's military genius perfectly. Together, they seek something called the Key, a weapon allegedly powerful enough to alter the destiny of the galaxy itself. The Arcs of Omen have struck across the length and breadth of the galaxy, recovering artifacts from sources that seem to have no connection to one another. An ancient pillar from a destroyed space marine chapter world, a fire-blackened cogitator bank from a shrine world reliquary, a meteorite embedded in the bedrock of a world visited by Alpha Legion agents. Each piece is brought before the warp portal at the heart of each arc, claimed by Abaddon and Vashtor for purposes that remain unclear even to their own followers. Imperial intelligence has struggled to understand the purpose behind the Arcs of Omen campaign. The artifacts being gathered seem to have no obvious connection, are recovered from worlds across the length and breadth of the galaxy. But those who have studied Abaddon's previous campaigns recognize the pattern. Every action serves a larger purpose. Every apparent setback conceals a hidden victory. Whatever Abaddon and Vashtor are building toward, it will likely reshape the galaxy as fundamentally as the Great Rift did. The assault on the Rock, the mobile fortress monastery of the Dark Angels, demonstrated the ambition of the Arcs of Omen campaign. This was not a mere raid, but a full-scale invasion of one of the most heavily defended structures in the Imperium. Vashtor led the attack personally, seeking a key fragment that was hidden within the Dark Angel's most secure vaults, though the attack was ultimately repulsed with the unexpected intervention of Belacor. As Abaddon and Vashtor succeeded in their primary objective, completing the key and adding its power to their arsenal. The return of Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the Dark Angels, occurred during the Arcs of Omen campaign, providing the Imperium with a much-needed reinforcement at a crucial moment. But even this miraculous event has not significantly altered the strategic balance. Abaddon has achieved his primary objectives, securing the key and establishing his dominance over the Dark Imperium. Whatever comes next, he approaches it from a position of strength that no Chaos Champion has held since Horus himself stood at the gates of the Imperial Palace. To understand why Abaddon has succeeded where so many others have failed, we must examine not merely his tactical and strategic capabilities, but the fundamental philosophy that underlies his approach to the Long War. The difference between Abaddon and other champions of chaos is not merely one of degree, but of kind. Where others see power in submission, Abaddon sees power in control. Where others believe that service to the dark gods is the path to ultimate strength, Abaddon understands that the dark gods would consume him as readily as they would consume his enemies. His approach to chaos is fundamentally transactional, a relationship between parties who happen to share common interests, rather than a bond of worship and devotion. This philosophy is reflected in every aspect of how he conducts the Long War. Other Chaos champions seek the favor of their patrons through increasingly extreme acts of devotion. A champion of Khorne must spill ever more blood to maintain the blood god's blessing. A servant of Slaanesh must pursue ever more extreme sensations to earn the Prince of Pleasure's attention. A devotee of Nurgle must spread ever more virulent plagues to remain in the Grandfather's good graces. A follower of Tzeentch must weave ever more complex schemes to impress the Lord of Change. This spiral of escalation is by design. The Chaos Gods do not want stable champions who maintain their power across millennia. They want a constant turnover, a stream of servants who burn brightly and then flame out, consumed by the very powers they sought to wield. The demon Primarchs are the exception, beings of such power that the gods found them more valuable as permanent servants than as temporary fuel for their appetites. But even the demon Primarchs are slaves, their wills subsumed into the greater purposes of their patrons. Abaddon has avoided this fate through sheer force of will and careful management of his relationship with the ruinous powers. He accepts their gifts, but refuses to become dependent on them. He uses their power, but never forgets that they would destroy him in an instant if they thought it would serve their interests. He maintains his own identity, his own goals, his own vision for the future, rather than losing himself in the madness that claims so many Chaos champions. The demon primarchs, for all their godlike power, are ultimately slaves. Angron is bound to Khorne, compelled by the nails in his skull and the blood rage that defines his existence. The butcher's nails are those terrible implants that were forced upon him by the slave masters of Nuceria, drove him to constant violence even during the Great Crusade. After his ascension to demonhood, that violence became his entire existence. He cannot think, cannot plan, cannot do anything but rage and kill. He is less a general now than a weapon, pointed at enemies and unleashed, effective but utterly without agency. Fulgrim serves Slaanesh, lost in an endless pursuit of ever more extreme sensations. The Phoenician, who once sought perfection in all things, now seeks only stimulation. His capacity for long-term planning has been eroded by his patron's influence, replaced by an obsessive focus on the next pleasure, the next experience, the next moment of sensation. He retreats to his demon world to indulge in excesses that would kill mortal beings 1,000 times over, only emerging when the promise of new experiences lures him into real space. Mortarion spreads Nurgle's plagues, becoming more instrument than individual with each passing century. The Death Lord once hated sorcery and the warp with a passion born of his experiences on Barbarous, where his tyrannical foster father used witch fires and foul magics to terrorize the human population. Now he is everything he once despised, a being of disease and decay who serves the very powers he once swore to destroy. His will has been broken so completely that he seems almost content in his servitude, a pallid ghost of the proud warrior he once was. Magnus serves Tzeentch, trapped in schemes, within schemes that even he may not fully understand. And the Crimson King's great intellect, once a source of pride and power, has become a cage. He pursues the machinations of the Changer of Ways with the same obsessive dedication that once drove his pursuit of knowledge. But now that pursuit serves Tzeentch's purposes rather than his own, he is a puppet who believes himself a player, a tool who thinks himself a craftsman. They retain much of their power, but they have surrendered their agency to forces beyond their control. Abaddon has chosen a different path. He accepts the gifts of all 4 Chaos gods, but bows to none of them. The mark of Chaos Ascendant grants him the favor of Khorne's rage, Tzeentch's cunning, Nurgle's resilience, and Slaanesh's allure. But it does not make him a slave to any of these powers. He uses chaos as a tool rather than allowing himself to be used by it. This independence comes at a cost. Abaddon will never ascend to demonhood, never gain the immortality and power that comes with fully giving oneself to the ruinous powers. But it also means he retains something that the demon primarchs have lost, the ability to make his own decisions, to change his plans when circumstances require it, to pursue goals that serve his interests rather than the inscrutable agendas of cosmic entities. His relationship with Drachnyan exemplifies this approach. The demon within his sword is an entity of incredible power, one of the most dangerous beings ever to exist in the warp. By all rights, such a demon should have consumed Abaddon's soul long ago, using his body as a puppet while pursuing its own nihilistic agenda. Instead, there exists between them something approaching partnership. Drachnyan fights for Abaddon because Abaddon provides the demon with opportunities to fulfill its purpose of ending empires and sowing destruction. It is an arrangement that benefits both parties, maintained through strength of will rather than mystical binding. This same principle applies to Abaddon's leadership of the Black Legion and the broader forces of Chaos. He does not rule through fear alone, as many Chaos champions attempt to do. He does not demand blind obedience or crush all dissent. Instead, he has created a structure that rewards competence and punishes failure, that gives ambitious warriors the opportunity to prove themselves while maintaining his own position at the apex of the hierarchy. The Black Legion accepts warriors from all backgrounds, all legions, all allegiances. Of former World Eaters fight alongside former Thousand Sons. Renegades from loyalist chapters stand shoulder to shoulder with veterans of the original heresy. What unites them is not devotion to a particular god or hatred of a specific enemy, but belief in Abaddon's vision and willingness to follow his lead in achieving it. This inclusivity has made the Black Legion the largest and most powerful of all the Traitor Legion warbands. While other legions squabble over ancient grudges and theological differences, the Black Legion grows stronger with each passing century. It is an army united by purpose rather than divided by ideology, and that unity has proven to be an almost insurmountable advantage in the long war. Abaddon's attitude toward failure and setback also sets him apart from other Chaos champions. But for most followers of the ruinous powers, defeat leads to punishment, often fatal punishment, from displeased patrons. This creates a culture of desperation and recklessness, where champions take ever greater risks to avoid the consequences of failure. Abaddon treats failure as information. A Black Crusade that does not achieve its ostensible objectives is not a disaster, but a learning experience. The defeats of his early crusades taught him the weaknesses of Imperial defenses, the capabilities of their forces, the psychology of their commanders. Each setback refined his plans, improved his strategies, brought him closer to the ultimate victory. This long-term perspective is perhaps Abaddon's greatest advantage. The Imperium thinks in terms of generations. The Chaos gods think in terms of cosmic cycles too vast for mortal comprehension. And Abaddon occupies a middle ground, patient enough to plan across millennia, while remaining focused enough to achieve concrete objectives within mortal timeframes. He is not distracted by the endless games of the warp or the petty concerns of everyday existence. Every action serves the long war, and the long war has a destination, the golden throne of terror. His hatred for the Emperor and the Imperium he created burns as bright today as it did when he stood over Horus's corpse. But unlike so many Chaos champions, Abaddon's hatred is cold rather than hot. It does not drive him to reckless action or cloud his judgment. It provides motivation, while his intellect provides direction. He hates the false emperor with every fiber of his being, but he hates him intelligently, methodically, with the patient determination of a sculptor working on a masterpiece that will take millennia to complete. The question that haunts Imperial strategists is simple. What comes next? Abaddon has achieved more in the last few centuries than Chaos has accomplished in the 10,000 years since the heresy. The Great Rift has divided the Imperium. Cadia has fallen. The Imperium Nihilus lies under his shadow. The key has been assembled, whatever that mysterious weapon may ultimately do. The forces of Chaos are stronger and more unified than they have been since Horus led them against Terra. This is the reality that the Imperium must now contend with, not the fragmented warbands of the past, squabbling among themselves in the eye of terror, while the Imperium slowly recovered from each Black Crusade, and not the mad champions who threw themselves against Imperial defenses with more fury than strategy, not even the demon Primarchs, whose godlike power is constrained by their subservience to their patrons. This is Abaddon, patient and calculating, in command of resources that dwarf anything he has possessed before, and with a track record of success that speaks for itself. Some believe that Abaddon will launch a new Black Crusade, a 14th, that will carry him all the way to Terra itself. The defenses of the Sol system, though formidable, have never faced an assault on the scale that Abaddon could now bring to bear. With the Great Rift preventing reinforcement from many loyal sectors, with the Imperial military stretched thin across thousands of crisis points, as the heart worlds of the Imperium are more vulnerable than they have been since the heresy. The custodians guard the Imperial Palace with the same vigilance they have maintained for 10 millennia. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains the defenses of Mars. its Titan legions and Skitarii forces ready to respond to any threat. But these defenders, formidable as they are, have never been tested against the full might of chaos unified. They have never faced an enemy who has spent 10,000 years studying their defenses, identifying their weaknesses, and preparing for exactly this moment. Others suggest that Abaddon will continue his methodical approach, consolidating his gains in the Imperium Nihilus before pushing further. The Dark Imperium represents an enormous prize, billions of worlds cut off from the Emperor's light, their populations ripe for corruption and conquest. Why rush toward terror when so much can be gained by patient exploitation of existing advantages? This approach would certainly be consistent with Abaddon's historical behavior. He has never been one to rush toward objectives that he was not prepared to achieve. The 13 Black Crusades could have been compressed into far fewer campaigns if he had been willing to accept higher risks. Instead, he took the slow path, the certain path, building toward his goal one step at a time. Why would he change that approach now, when it has brought him closer to victory than any Chaos champion since Horus? There is also the question of the key, and what Abaddon intends to do with it. Yet the artifact that he and Vashtor have assembled is said to possess power capable of altering the destiny of the galaxy. Some speculate that it is a weapon of direct destruction, something that could shatter planetary defenses or neutralize the power of the Golden Throne. Others believe it is more subtle, a tool that will allow Abaddon to achieve objectives that conventional military force could never accomplish. The truth is that only Abaddon knows his true intentions, and he has demonstrated a remarkable ability to keep those intentions hidden until the moment of execution. What we can say with certainty is that he has not stopped. The Arks of Omen continue their mysterious mission. The Black Legion grows stronger. Alliances with entities like Vashtor expand the resources at his command. Whatever comes next, and it will be the product of meticulous planning and absolute commitment to his ultimate goal. The Warmaster of Chaos has proven himself to be the most successful military commander since Horus himself. Unlike Horus, he has learned from failure. Unlike the demon Primarchs, he has maintained his agency. Unlike the countless champions who have risen and fallen in the long war, he has demonstrated the patience and strategic vision necessary to achieve lasting success. Think about what that means. In a galaxy where the forces of chaos are supposed to be inherently self-destructive, where the ruinous powers are expected to undermine their own champions through jealousy and spite, Abaddon has maintained his position at the head of the Black Legion for 10,000 years. He has survived assassination attempts, demonic betrayals, the machinations of rival champions, and the full weight of the Imperium's military might. Not only has he survived, he has thrived, growing stronger with each passing century while his enemies have grown weaker. That is not luck. That is not coincidence. That is the result of strategic genius applied across timescales that most minds cannot comprehend, combined with a will strong enough to resist the corrupting influence of the very powers he claims to serve. 10,000 years ago, Ezekiel Abaddon was a gang fighter on a dying world, dreaming of nothing more than survival until tomorrow. Today, he stands at the threshold of victory in a war that has consumed the galaxy for millennia. His Black Legion numbers in the millions. His allies include demon princes and dark mechanicum, warp-touched warlords and corrupted forge worlds. His enemies are weakened, divided, and facing threats on all sides. The galaxy holds its breath, waiting to see what the despoiler will do next. And somewhere, in the depths of the Eye of Terror, aboard the vengeful spirit that has carried him through 10,000 years of war, Abaddon the Despoiler plots his next move in the long war. Some say the Emperor will rise from his throne to face this threat, that in humanity's darkest hour, the Master of Mankind will once again walk among his children. Others believe that Guilliman's return is only the first of many, that more Primarchs will awaken to defend the Imperium in its time of greatest need. Still others whisper that it is already too late, that Abaddon's victory is inevitable, and that the only question remaining is how long the death throes of the Imperium will last. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. The long war continues. It has continued for 10,000 years, and it will continue until one side or the other lies broken beyond recovery. Abaddon understands this better than anyone. He has built his entire existence around this understanding, has sacrificed everything that Ezekiel Abaddon once was in service to a vision that only he can see. And in that dedication, in that absolute commitment to a goal that most beings would abandon as impossible, lies the secret of his success. He will not stop. He will not waver. He will not be distracted by the petty concerns that consume lesser beings. He will continue marching toward terror, one step at a time, until he either achieves his goal or is destroyed in the attempt. Let the galaxy burn. Guan, if you found this journey through the life and campaigns of Abaddon the Despoiler enlightening, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Your support helps us continue producing content that explores the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40k universe. Drop a comment below to let us know who you'd like to hear about next, whether it's another legendary figure of chaos, a hero of the Imperium, or one of the countless other factions that struggle for survival in the grim darkness of the far future. Until next time, keep the Emperor's light close, and remember that in the far future, there is only war.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.